in how I'll present it.
So you should be able to share screen right now.
Okay, I'll just click on that. Let's see if that pops up for everybody. Can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. So I guess that means I can start presenting. So thanks, Dawn, and thanks to all of you for joining today. I see we've got people from all over the world, and in a way, my presentation might be a bit dry, and I hope that it won't be too long so that we can actually spend some time chatting towards the end about what this really means. I think the topic itself is quite timely. So I'm going to start out with a couple of definition type slides, but ultimately I'll be talking about food supply chains using my own experience operating a small market garden, and I'll compare and contrast some of what is known about global agricultural supply chains, particularly in light of the current threats to global security. And really, I'll be making the case that we need all kinds of production. So like I said, I hope that we'll have time to chat together at the end, talking about if local is really better and if global is all that bad. I did want to start out my presentation today grounded in a quote from the Baha'i writings and leave it with you to ponder as we dive into a more material topic and thoughts for the rest of the presentation. So I'll read it here. Every man of discernment, while walking upon the earth, feeleth indeed abashed, inasmuch as he is fully aware that the thing which is the source of his prosperity, his wealth, his might, his exaltation, his advancement and power, is, as ordained by God, the very earth which is trodden beneath the feet of all men. Baha'u'llah, Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. So nearly everything we eat in one way or another has grown in soil, is tied to soil. It is where our wealth comes from. But what does that look like in practice? Let's move into the heart of discussion today, food supply chains. I thought I should start with a definition of what a supply chain is. So according to Bloom Global, a supply chain is a connected system of organizations, activities, information, and resources designed to source, produce, and move goods from origin to final destination, typically from a supplier to an end customer. Modern supply chains are very complex, spanning multiple countries and involving many steps. So here we can see that the shortest supply chain is to have our own home gardens, to be our own producers. And while the store is representing our most complex aspects of the food supply chain, where food is grown on a farm somewhere in the world, it is transported to a packaging and distribution warehouse. Often it is transported again, maybe across an ocean where it's going to another packaging and distribution warehouse, then to the store where consumers can buy it to take home and cook. Today, I'm not going to talk about manufactured foods, just want to look at produce in its fresh and raw form. There are challenges with both global and local supply chains, so let's spend just a couple of minutes talking about those. Global supply chains refer to cross-border organization of activities required to produce goods and get them to consumers. It's a relatively new concept, beginning in the 1940s with the evolution of transportation. And the sheer complexity of today's global supply chains has created challenges. There's a lack of transparency, goods that are lost or delayed, increased waste, disconnected consumers. And that doesn't even begin to cover the challenges brought on by the global pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Here I'm talking about material scarcity, increasing freight prices, difficult demand forecasting, port congestion, changing consumer attitudes, digital transformation, inflation, and the list just goes on. I mean, just this week in Canada, the Competition Bureau announced a study into grocery. Can you guys hear me okay? The Canadian Competition Bureau announced a study into grocery store gouging. Prices in grocery stores here have been going up at a rate faster than inflation for 10 months in a row, and consumers are taking notice. I think they're starting to become more connected, and we saw that throughout the pandemic as well. But, you know, just because the supply chain is shorter doesn't mean it's without challenges. I mean, after all, globalized supply chains emerged to address the problems in local supply chains, like lack of choice. And few options means difficulty, like just lack of choice. And then we have resiliency. You know, what if a business owner is sick, or there is a flood, or pests? It can mean total crop failure, and suppliers can go out of business. I think we're really lucky to have global supply chains to offset some of the risks of having local supply chains only. Challenges with scaling on the small level can mean production inefficiencies, which means expensive for the consumer. And in the last decade, though, the advent of social media and digital trade has provided a platform for smaller scale local producers of all kinds to reemerge, get discovered, and connect more directly with consumers. So now I want to talk a little bit more, like that's just a little bit of foundation into what supply chains look like. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my farm and what we do. And hopefully this will encourage some of you guys as well to present in the future if you were nervous about presenting to this group. I think it's just great to share what we're all doing with each other. So we are called Summit Hill Farm, and we sell using the community supported agriculture, or CSA, business model, which allows us to sell directly to consumers who prepay us for a seasonal subscription while sharing some of the inherent risks of growing vegetables in this part of the world. So I'm talking about hail, deer, snow, to name just a few. We've been operating for 6 seasons, expanding and contracting the operation as our other work schedules allow. We typically have 1 acre in vegetable production on about a 4-acre plot, with 1 acre dedicated to perennial trees and shrubs, and 2 acres in cover crop. This year, we had a mixture of tillage radish, barley, and buckwheat. As Dawn mentioned, our farm is located northwest of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, in Treaty 7 and Métis Region 3 territory, which includes the traditional lands used by the Îethka, the Tsuut'ina, and the Siksika Indigenous people, as well as the Métis Nation. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that for millennia, this area has been their home and a place of hunting, gathering, harmony, balance, and commerce, and from whom we have not even begun to learn about local agriculture, about agricultural practices. But we do take note when the buffalo bean is in bloom, because we know that means the soil is warm enough for germination, and our area is full of sage and wild mint. I also wanted to mention, like, when I talk about the size of our farm being only 4 acres, this is like not a real farm by Canadian standards. It is typical of the average farm in the world, right? Most farms are smallholder farms, but like that is not the case in North America. The average farm, like where I live, is, well, Neil can probably chime in, but you know, we're talking thousands of acres. And large scale industrial production that can be shipped to meet global food demand. What I produce is meant for the local consumer. So my parents let us use they have a half section of land, and they let me use 4 acres of it for this market garden, which I farm with my husband, volunteers, our kid, help of my parents, and occasionally employee. I really want to situate ourselves in place. So this isn't an easy area for agricultural production. And there is a Canadian agricultural land suitability rating, and the suitability for agriculture of where we farm is called 4HT, or severely unsuitable for agriculture due to the lack of heat units, and with slopes steep enough to incur water erosion or to limit production. But frankly, climate change has been good to us. Warming climate has, it's really extended our growing season overall. It's hotter still a short period of time with 106 frost-free days, May 27th to a September 11th in a typical year. This year, I think our first hard frost was this week. So that's like a whole month later than what is typical. And I also want to note that we are in the Red Deer River watershed. And for me, this is actually really important because my husband and I don't live on the farm. My parents still do. But we live and we sell most of our products into the Bow River Basin. And the Bow River Basin is under a lot of pressure from human development, growth of cities, irrigation, and industry. The Red Deer River watershed, a little bit less so. And so I think in my lifetime, we'll see severe water restrictions on the Bow River Basin, but hopefully not, my fingers are crossed, not on the Bow River watershed. I think when I think about most businesses and the economic model that we have in the world today, it's, well, in North America anyways, it's really extractive. And for me, what I find a bit different about the community-supported agriculture way of doing business is that it allows us to look a little bit broader than that. So rather than only be focused on economic success, we also each year look at economic, social, and environmental impacts of our business. And we do see that in big scale industry as well with the advent of ESGs. Environmental social governance models of accounting, where individuals are putting pressure on businesses to be more wholly accountable. But it's really a lot easier to do this on the small scale. It doesn't mean it's easier to be successful on all three fronts, though. Each year we make a bit of progress, but I wouldn't say we've achieved success on any one front of being economically, socially, or environmentally sustainable. But I wanted to share a few indicators that we used in 2020. So we had 40 CSA members, so 40 families subscribed to our CSA. We also had over 40 people come out and volunteer on our harvest day. So we open up the farm for people to come and actually get their hands dirty, taking vegetables, helping us sort the potatoes, wash the carrots. And it's been astounding to me how few people know how a potato is grown, that it grows underground and has this big bush. And so I think this aspect of our business is really important to connect people to what it means to grow food, what it looks like, how much work is involved. And I hope it makes them think a little bit about, the benefits of industrial agriculture. Because maybe we don't want to spend all of our time growing food. Maybe it's a good thing that we have some of this industrialization. I went back to 2020 on some of our other indicators. We had 2 paid summer interns. We also partnered with 4 other farms, one who has a greenhouse for growing tomatoes, which is really quite critical in our part of the world, a small goat cheese producer, and a fellow who grows microgreens. We were able to donate 30 bags of produce to a women's shelter, and we had like frequent drop-offs to our local free food fridges, and we also gave $200 to local food banks, and that was 10% of our extra sales. And we strive each year to provide a good diversity of vegetables to clients. So that's what you see in the pictures here. Often we grow heritage or unique varieties that aren't available in stores. We save our own seeds when we can, and we participate in seed trials with other regional farms. This year we trialed radicchio. No one's really growing it commercially where we are. It was a lot of fun. You can ask me about that later if you're interested in radicchio. Yeah, and I guess the next point, I kind of talked a little bit about it already, but I think in Western society especially, we've just become increasingly urbanized. Only 2% of Canadians live on farms, and I was reading the other day that maybe only 3 in 10 have ever visited a commercial farm. So, we've become profoundly disconnected from where our food comes from. And I believe this is partly from an unintended consequences of food safety policies from the early 70s and earlier. coupled with technological advances that have allowed humans to undertake less physically demanding occupations. And we've just urbanized over that time in the West. And at the same time, it's fundamentally changed our communities where they are more urban. I also wanted to note for everybody that I live in a really affluent part of the world where the median before tax income is about 100,000 US dollars. So that allows us to charge quite a bit of money for vegetables, which would otherwise be a really cheaply produced product. There are people who can afford to pay what we charge. And our clients find value in being directly connected to a farm and having the opportunity to volunteer in cooking and eating the freshest veggies without having to garden themselves. And in understanding the seasonality of food, you know, they see the impact that hail has firsthand. And they know that the season could end early here because of snow. All right, back to supply chains. We have a really simple supply chain inputs. We've got soil, sun, rain, well water, seeds, compost, labor, both paid and volunteer, transportation, packaging, row cover, equipment, of course, marketing, and a tractor. We do nearly everything by hand, save some tillage in the spraying and potato digging. And this year we bought some equipment so we could make square bales, which was good, good addition. So, you know, when we look at the supply chain, clients subscribe to our farm on the Open Food Network. So I just wanted to share, social media has made it so much easier for us to talk to clients and potential clients. I think that's not just here, that's everywhere in the world. And so I really like this e-commerce platform, the openfoodnetwork.ca. I think it's available in other parts of the world too. It just makes it super easy for clients to subscribe and pay, but they do need to trust us that we will eventually deliver them vegetables as promised, sometimes many months after they have paid. For our first 5 years, though, we just used a Google form and e-transfer. So last year's the first year we used the Open Food Network. That allows us to order our seed and the right amount of seed and really reduce food waste because we only plant for exactly the number of clients that we have. We get to work planting it and harvest. We then have to put our food into cold storage, transport it to the clients. Sometimes they're on site helping to volunteer and they pick it up right there. And then it goes back to a year round. So it's super simple, right? And if we were to, I'm not going to fully contrast this with a global supply chain, but the difference is really around this transportation piece. It's just a lot more complex. And then of course we add in the store and distribution and warehousing. So there's a lot more time in that period. So there's a lot more time between when the food is harvested and when it's delivered to a client or us as consumers. But what I wanted to spend the rest of the time talking about is the simple onion and just really compare like what it looks like on our farm versus global onion trade. Just as an example, this year at our farm, we really scaled back and we basically only grew root vegetables. We were trying to balance our other careers with still growing veggies. So we grew potatoes, beets, carrots, and onions for a single Thanksgiving delivery to our clients. And what this did is it really allowed us to understand the time involved to plant, maintain, harvest, and deliver each of these crops to our clients. And without this analysis, we could never even hope to be commercially, like an economically viable business or profitable. So here you can see that it costs us about $30 Canadian to buy 10 pounds of onion sets. And it took 25 hours to plant, harvest, weed, water, and some administrative time as well. So we know how much we could pay ourselves. And knowing these costs allows us to set a fair price, $3 a pound Canadian for onions. At the store, you'll see it's usually $1 a pound Canadian, or about 75 cents US. So it is more expensive. And I guess that's what I meant in the early stages, that local supply chains can often be less efficient. But knowing our actual costs will allow us to do some analysis if it's worthwhile to automate any of our processes, if we can invest in equipment. What the payback period is. And I wanted to talk a little bit about transparency. There's nothing in this piece and what I've said here that accounts for the fun that we have with our volunteers, or, the learning that happens when you do have teens come out to help with planting and you pay them minimum wage for their time. After reading The Half Is Never Been Told, which was one of the reading groups that the Agricultural Working Group had last year, I'm super cognizant of when we use volunteers and when we need to pay people and how we communicate that with our clients. So yeah, we can be super transparent. We planted 1,100 bulbs. They were planted by my daughter, Una, myself, my husband, a couple of volunteers, and we can share the specific dates with our clients. And we know who harvested them and how they were cleaned. I'll contrast this with commercial onion production, and there's so much data available on commercial onion production. So I am taking data here from Statistics Canada because I wanted to compare my own production data with farms that face similar growing conditions. And what's interesting, I think, is that the yield is the same per square foot, but commercial farms in Alberta only earn 32 cents a pound for an onion. Remember, I'm charging my clients, the consumer, directly $3 a pound. So like big difference in what I as a farmer receive, and also triple the price for the consumer. And I know those commercial guys have the production and cleaning process fully automated. It's the only way they can charge that small amount. But I guess I also wanted to share, well, I'm never going to plant a full acre of onions by hand. By acre, the average farm in Alberta would earn $13,750 in revenue on an acre of onions, whereas for myself, I could earn twice that amount doing it by hand. So the overall top revenue is more, but it costs more for the consumer, of course, as well. The commercial onion production, even though there's a lot of data available, like you're never going to get the level of transparency that you can when you buy directly from a farmer. And the waste is unknown. We know that there is a lot of waste, food waste from commercial agricultural production. And the small scale, we can track it, and really we don't have any waste. Anything that might be considered waste, we compost back on the farm. And I don't think my clients are wasting much when it comes to onions, maybe other products. All right, so like we started super zoomed in, and now I want to zoom really far out. I'm talking about global net trade. One of my favorite websites and tools is OEC World Data. And in 2020, there were $7.4 billion of onions traded globally. The countries that had a largest trade value in exports of onions were China at $2.6 billion, or 35% of global onion exports, the Netherlands, Spain, Mexico, and India. So the Netherlands was about $719 million of onion exports. You can see like all of these countries are in yellow on the map, so the main exporters. Conversely, those that were importing, the largest importers were Indonesia at 550 million, Vietnam 527 million, the US at 469 million, Brazil and Germany also being other big importers of onions. again, I want to touch on transparency of our global food system. And for me, one thing that comes to mind is forced labor. So I did a little bit of Googling and research because I do know that there is a lot of forced labor in the world. And the US Department of Labor does publish information on that. And they cited both Mexico and Paraguay as using child labor for onion production. And so there's quite a high threshold for this definition of child labor. It's not like casual volunteer. It really needs to be forced, and it result in children not receiving other kinds of education. So I was a bit surprised to see that. I did talk a little bit about the advent of e-commerce, which I think has been like super helpful for small scale growers to connect with consumers, but there's all kinds of production technologies that are like really, I think, going to change supply chains completely when it comes to food. And I didn't put too much, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but you know, when we think about smallholder farmers like myself, most of the work is done by hand, but I think there are just massive technology leaps that are going to allow for evolving and shorter agricultural supply chains. Not necessarily cheaper food, but I hope that will follow as well. You know, we just see tremendous leaps in closed environment agriculture, and more work that can be automated. This week, I learned about a mushroom harvesting company. So a company that goes in and it's completely automated now. Yields from closed environment agriculture are much more predictable. The quality is more predictable. Food can be grown closer to the people in urban areas, and the growing season is maximized as weather risks are minimized. I think like the only questions I have about moving into that area are people really going to want to work in closed environment agriculture? And I guess how much more can we take the automation moving forward? So that's kind of it. That's what I wanted to share with people. I do have a lot more thoughts. I didn't really dive into the Russian situation in Ukraine, which is going to have devastating, I think, potentially devastating impacts on global food security, and how we might be able to shift production to other parts of the world and really increase efficiency overall. I do have some questions for us to discuss in small groups for anyone who wants to stay on and chat longer. And I guess if people have questions or want to discuss now, that's fine as well. But this is sort of the end.
Oh, thank you. Alberta, I was wondering with these questions, do you have them in a format where you could put them in the chat so that we go to our breakout groups?
That's a great question.
How should we do that?
Maybe I'll just stop sharing.
Okay.
And then sorry, did I
breakout groups? I'd like to point something out after you get this organized.
Okay, did I successfully stop sharing?
There's a beautiful picture there.
Oh, there we go. Like I've got two windows here. There we go. There, I've been able to stop sharing now. And there's the questions in the chat.
Oh, okay, great. Right. So Winnie, you had something you wanted to say?
Yes, if you scroll up in the chat, I want that people be sure that they can copy, if they want to, the International Environment Forum's program, which will be on next Saturday. And it's very critical one about climate change. So don't miss that.
Right.
Thanks, Winnie.
Right. That's great. So are we ready to go to,
Maybe I could just answer. There are a couple of questions in the chat here, and I can share some thoughts with
Right.
Douglas Barker, just as I scan through it. And he's probably got some good questions there that people can discuss in breakout groups. But I wanted to share one of the technologies that I see evolving is actually supply chain monitoring of food. So there are some pretty cool companies out there that have just developed ways that really track from farm to fork where food is coming from. So I think those will evolve in time, and I guess I can share more about that with you directly, Doug, if that's of interest. And you're right, the cost model that I showed didn't reflect sustainable techniques that I deploy versus monoculture from commercial methods. But I would argue as well that even though large scale commercial guys need their soil to be healthy so that they can keep producing. And I think they'll be adopting better and better technologies moving forward.
well, thank you. So I was wondering, Alberta, do you really want to go to breakout groups, or do you think that we could have we could just discuss these?
I think we can just discuss, because we do have a small group today. Okay. Sometimes there's a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's hard if there's only people. All right, so Winnie, did you have a question?
I do. I am so interested in this closed environment agriculture, and I mean, Canada most likely is looking at it carefully too. But I've wondered about power sources and the inhibitions of how you sustain something like that with, the power grid or water. There's so many things that have to be monitored, and the inputs, it seems a little fragile to me. Can you speak to that?
Oh, I just agree with you. I think it's early stages still for large scale closed environment agriculture in the Northern Hemisphere, where we are really getting most of our food from that type of environment. But I also kind of think it's inevitable. There's just a lot of people researching in that area. It is super interesting. There's always an intersect with energy and agriculture on many fronts. So I don't see that being any different than even the current system of agriculture right now, where there's an intersect on transportation, on production, on the fossil fuels that we need for fertilizer. I mean, the way that is broken out usually, how it's harvest, like how fertilizers are produced. But I think the closed environment allows us to be a lot more efficient with those inputs and really precise. And we're also going to see a lot more on precision agriculture and climate smart agriculture as well for outdoor growing. So I think there's no way to, there's just going to be so much evolving in that space. So not just closed environment, but also outdoor, as we try and be more precise with our inputs. I'm sure lots of you have better thoughts on this topic than I do. So Arthur, maybe I see you've got your hand up and probably have like actual intelligence to contribute to this conversation rather than a question for me.
Well, it's a combination. I think certainly with respect to some of the new intensive agricultural techniques, the research is very interesting. There are challenges in terms of energy. And in fact, one of the things I would hope that can be explored in the future, I haven't seen people developing solar tractors or small, solar powered instruments that can be used to simplify the workload in agriculture at a small scale, relatively cheaply, without depending on being part of an electric grid or anything like that. And it would be so helpful in the developing countries as well if they had something that could provide, save them on the energy side of things, but entirely sustainable at a local level. Well, the point first I want to point out about supply chains. I saw a study recently of one of the leading international thinkers on complex systems, who said that the agricultural system globally and its supply chains has become more and more concentrated as the big multinational corporations buy up all the others. And he says that the studies have shown that when you have a network with many different branching points and many, there's a lot more resilience. You can break a few supply chains here and there, and other things will take over. Once you get more and more levels of concentration, this was much more vulnerable to a complete collapse. And he said, the banking system collapsed in 2008 because the banking had so concentrated that one bank failed and the whole thing came down and it was bailed out at the last minute. But he said, we're getting more and more to the point where we could see a collapse in the total global food system, between climate change impacting production in many parts of the world. There already 2008, 2012, we ate more food than we produced because there were crop failures in Russia and in a number of other places in the world, and we're living on reserves. But as supply chains have become more focused on immediate delivery and no storage, we're much more vulnerable to any kind of breakage in the system as companies try to increase their profit margins all along the line. So he was really warning that we could easily see in the near future, and it may even be starting now, a complete collapse in the global food system with hundreds of million people starving because they can't get food. So I think this is the kind of a challenge that will push us more towards local production for better security and resilience if we don't become dependent on extremely fragile international supply chains for food. So I think you've told us the direction to go in terms of what can be done locally. I actually seen here, I'm living in Geneva and in this urban area, the local municipalities would encourage little small scale vegetable production in and around the buildings. They little raised beds, and you can get 15, 20, 30 square, 40 square feet of soil to grow things in. But they actually say local residents can have these if they'll partner with a newly arrived refugee. So it's not only food production for local use, but also helping to integrate refugees in the local community, and a human challenge at the same time as a food challenge. So interesting things are happening. So thank you very much for sharing. And I hope we have a lovely discussion as we go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. I agree with everything you said. And there's just so much to pursue there. It was, as you can imagine, talking about supply chains is just challenging because there's so much to talk about. And I just pared it down to my own experience so that we can tackle some of those global versus local topics. But I did want to share the OEC World Tool with everybody, for people to see what it looks like, because it is, it's freely available data on exports and imports and trade by country. And like maybe what's a little bit more topical today is trade in wheat. And I guess you can all see my screen. So you can see that like the top wheat exporters are Russia, Canada, France, Ukraine, and the US. And globally, obviously, there's some big issues with the Ukraine and Russia. But with this tool, you can click on a country. So on the left-hand side, we can see Ukraine exports 8.97% of the world's wheat. Where do they send it to? Well, mostly to Egypt, a quarter of it to Egypt, then Indonesia and Pakistan. And like the challenges that's going to be brought on by this war, there's lots of information out there on predictions, but this is what we can see as where those exports have been going and where is going to be disrupted this fall and next fall. And will Russia be able to pick up the slack on their own production? Will the sanctions against them that the global community has put out impact that? I don't know, but it's just a really cool tool to look at if you're interested in thinking about where people are trading and the impacts of these supply chains. See, in Canada, we're exporting mostly to China and Japan, and I think the States as well. just obviously we're like a little bit closer. Anyways, you can look up basically any product that you want on the OEC World Data website and get simple analysis like this, cool visualizations. I just wanted to share that.
Alberta, what is the link for that?
Mm.
OEC or OECD?
OEC, I'll put it in. This is the link straight to the wheat.
Thank you very much.
Alberta, I think that was in the announcement, right? Did you have
Yeah.
that in the announcement? If you look at the references in the announcement that was sent to you, where the link is, there are a whole list of readings. It says suggested readings. And so they're
Oh, yes, I see it. Sorry.
right
Yeah.
there. So that's
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I just
No.
point that out that everyone has that. There's some really interesting information. And maybe you'd like to talk about that a little bit, the different, those different websites, and there's a podcast, and there are a couple of other really interesting, those are all really interesting references.
Yeah, one of the other references I put out was Climavores podcast, which is a pretty new one out of the US, and looking at the intersection of climate change and agriculture. I don't know. There are a couple of reporters that put it out. So sometimes I wish that they would interview people instead of just espousing their own opinions, but they put out good information. And the one that I just listened to yesterday was on agroforestry, really, which is something that comes up quite a bit in this working group. I didn't talk too much, but like that is something that on our farm, that's actually what we started with. We started with a Kickstarter, and we had random people from all over the world contributing small amounts of money. And we planted, I think, 1,200 trees and shrubs so that we do have some fruit, perennial fruit production on the perimeter of our garden area.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's really beautiful. I was just thinking, I'm in this reading group, and Gary Richet is in the reading group too, and we're discussing, and Björg, you're in that too, in that reading group. And he was just discussing, as you had mentioned, this enclosed environment, agriculture is really becoming something, and it's something that can be used by anyone, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's very kind of consumer friendly and, small farmer friendly. Even I use some of these techniques, which is, row covers. Simple row covers have just revolutionized, I think, for a lot of people, the ability to grow things out of season and extend seasons so that you can have things growing through the winter. Here in North Carolina, a lot of people can grow certain things, but by using row covers, simple kind of hoop coverings and row covers, low tunnels, all of these things, like you were showing, they're kind of mini greenhouse looking type structures, but they've really changed how people can grow through season extension. And it helps, I think, locally to make it so that people in local areas have sources of different kinds of produce throughout the year. And I think one of the things that Gary Richet mentioned was that he was also kind of delving into some aquaponics. So using the fish and using the waste from the fish to fertilize, to use as food for the plants. And so, there are so many of these things coming up now that they're really, I think, going to help people to, in a sense, support that local supply chain, so that we're not having to depend completely on, different kinds of produce that come from far distant. I always use the example of lettuce, like here in North Carolina. Why can we not grow lettuce? Why do we have to get lettuce from California? So anyway,
Yeah.
that's my comments there.
I agree. And it brings up something I also just didn't know how to work into the presentation. I know Winnie's got a comment too, but like we're pretty lucky in North America where we can produce most of our, we could be completely nutritionally independent, right? We have land and resources and storage techniques to produce all the calories that we need to feed ourselves. But like not everywhere in the world is so lucky. I think of Singapore in particular, where their government has just put out a policy that they want to be able to produce 30% of their calories by 2030. And a lot of that will come from closed environment agriculture, I think, and aquaponics and nearshore fisheries. But they're a small island nation that's highly dense, and they're just not going to be able to, they don't have the land resources, they don't have the soil to be able to produce 100% of their own calories. And so just an example of where the world is really interconnected on food too. And why maybe here in the Western world where we do have a lot of soil, it's important that we do continue to put effort into increasingly efficient production, and hopefully efficient production that looks at environment, social, and economic indicators, and not just the pure economic indicators. Winnie?
I just admire the breadth of your on the ground knowledge and then your global knowledge. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. I want to go to youth because for a long time we had an apprentice program in what we called at that time sustainable agriculture around the world to try to encourage youth. We know that the farmer is aging in North America and we don't have a great influx. I don't know if we have population figures that would tell us, is there a new young wave? I know there is on small scale. I don't know if there is on large scale. And so I thought it might be nice to hear what was the reaction of your young interns. Had they worked in the soil before? Just if you could give us some background on the young people.
I wish they were here. I didn't specifically invite them, but they could have come. The one was a high school student. She had finished grade 10, so between grade 10 and 11, and her family are clients of ours. And so she came and worked for us for a summer just on our harvest days, because that's when we really needed help. She loved it. We also, I should maybe mention, we got some grant funding to hire youth, which made it economically feasible for us, because frankly, I could not pay minimum wage for those employees. We're working towards that economic viability. She loved it. She this summer spent the summer working for another small scale farm cooperative, I guess, YYC Growers, more in the warehouse side of things. But I know she loved getting her hands dirty. She loved being like actually out in the soil. Our other intern, we've had her for like one season full time, or like one season part time, I guess it was, but kind of full time for the size of our operation. And I know she misses it. She really likes, I don't know, it's just the environment where we are. It's extremely beautiful. I'll pop a link into Google Earth. I couldn't quite make it work with the screen share to show this Google Earth, but like we're in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. It's an absolutely stunning environment. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes is that, and somebody can correct me, but where the country is for the soul and the city is for the body, right? And so I know our employees and our clients who bring their kids out to volunteer love it. I'll just say that this year, not our employees, but the volunteers we had on Harvest Day, and this is where I'm like a little conflicted with paying people and then them recognizing that it's volunteer and they're happy to come volunteer. But we had 4 kids and they were kids, they were like 8 to 10 years old, who washed all of the carrots, and they had a blast. And in the end, they did have a water fight, you know, like that made it a lot of fun. but it was also fun for all of us to just watch them, and they self-directed themselves. Like one of them fully took charge of the other two, and they were on it, and they washed all the carrots. But I think it's that kind of experience I hope it's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives, on what it looks like to what a farm can look like, what it looks like to grow your own food, how much work is involved, and also makes people appreciate a little bit the industrialization that we do have as well. So that's like, they loved it. Now, do you want me to talk about my daughter and how she feels about it? It's like, that's not a positive story. Right.
Well,
She's happy to be paid though. And so we do have our one volunteer day, and she knows she's expected to volunteer for half a day, and she does okay. The attitude isn't great. But on the days when she comes and she knows she's being paid, she works really hard, and who knows the impact that will have on her in the longer term.
well, I had that experience with my kids. I mean, to get them to pick a bucket of tomatoes was pulling teeth.
Mhm.
And when we were selling vegetables so they could go to Disney World, that was a different matter.
Yeah.
And then one of them, who had been loath to go in the garden, ended up getting 2 degrees in agriculture from NC State here. So things do change sometimes.
We have a couple of comments and questions in the chat from Douglas. Douglas Barker says, anyone have experience with farm bots? Silence, huh?
I put the link there. It's like a lot of we're talking here is very small farming. They're more of a back garden, a garden plot, little robotic system that you will tend your garden.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't tried it or seen much of it. I had seen this earlier on. But I think it would really have to, it has some challenges I see just from the video. Like it really would have to scale quite a bit more. Maybe it's just as good for people to get their hands dirty at the size of technology they are working on right now. But if they can get it bigger, or for closed environment, I see it's like all showing outdoors, but if it is enclosed environment agriculture, like I think anything automated is going to be great. I know, talking to my intern last weekend about working indoors in a greenhouse, and it's just not the same as being outside. So I think there's really something to that fresh air that's a little bit more enjoyable for most people. It's very labor intensive when you move indoors, right? Oh, outdoors too. But the indoor side of things, it's really about efficiency and like how fast you can move. And so maybe machines are better suited to that kind of work.
Any other questions or comments?
Could I just say that I thought this was wonderful. I really thought this was wonderful at Alberta. Firstly, you're a really nice presenter. It was an absolutely beautiful presentation with all the references, but you also addressed this aspect of false dichotomies. The world, it's not never either or. Indoor farming or closed environment farming has its strengths, but that's not feasible for, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought the objectivity of your presentation was really good.
Thanks, Neil. You're always so positive and encouraging.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we found this in some of our reading groups, reading on different aspects of agriculture, different methods, and all these controversies and contention between opposing groups, that really a lot of the answers are going to be in using all of the above, not none of, one, it's not one thing or the other. It's not black and white. It's going to be a progression of combining and using lots of different technologies, lots of different methods. And it has to be suited to the location, right? Very location specific. Douglas, you had a question?
I'm coming up from a little bit of a different vein. I'm making a product, and all our ingredients currently are coming from the tropics. Supply chain is an issue. The fact that that there's no way I can ensure that any kind of standards like ISO 24000, which is a human rights standard, is maintained. All these types of things are quite an issue to me, particularly as a Baha'i. And so the topic that came up was, I'm obviously taking a different bent than most of the the other participants here. I'm not thinking in terms of just what's on the shelf. I need a product coming in at a certain time to make my do a batch, and then has to come in at another time. So it's very hard for me to work with the standard model of all the tomatoes grow, and then you've got to harvest them all at once, and then you got to process them all at once, and then you got to package them in a way that will last a nuclear holocaust. So I'm coming at it from the, it's a significant matter to me how this comes to through my back door to process.
Do you want to share a little bit about what your product is, Douglas?
Okay, I'm making a ginger beer.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
All right, but
Right.
ginger beer traditionally, from where it was traditionally made, it was something that was fermenting on the kitchen counter, and it cleaned the water. Okay, it was not enough alcohol to make it an issue. It was something that they could give to the kids, but it was cleaning the water. Okay, that's where the tradition comes from. It was also very resuscitating, and so it became a working class drink. And yes, that's how it was introduced into the Caribbean and other places where they had slave labor. Okay, but we don't put any processed ingredients in our product. We crush all the ingredients, so it's all fresh ingredients that go in there, and it's and the taste is, as one elderly Jamaican gentleman said, it was like what my grandmother used to make. So we've trying to revive traditional taste and flavor, and it's a bit of a slog, but once people recognize that what they're buying right now is what they call ultra processed, and then food in quotations, what they're buying now is not food. What they're buying is sugar, water, and flavoring. Okay.
Yeah.
What we're supplying is real food. So that's what we're doing.
And your challenge is really traceability of the ginger, right? Is that basically the only product that you're importing?
We crush sugarcane, we crush ginger, and we crush limes. Yes, the where they're coming from, I'm really anxious about what and the fact that too, that like for instance, limes, I can't get heritage limes. No one wants to sell it because it's as they say, oh, those ones, they just fall off the trees and rot. No one wants to buy them. The limes with seeds. There are many in this audience that remember a time when limes had seeds. Okay, it was not even thought of having a lime or an orange without seeds in them. That was just the way they were, and so the idea is that let's put it this way: the oranges that grow in the Baha'i World Center are a whole different orange than what we're buying in the grocery store. And those are incredible. Okay, so heritage ingredients are very difficult to find. You know, so do I do it myself? Or, you know, and how do I make sure that the land preservation is there? It's very difficult. It's, no one wants to talk about it.
Well, and it's very complex. And I
Yes.
think that's why agriculture is to be the first thing considered when we look into all of the ways we can implement, you know, the teachings in the faith. It's just so complex. It impacts everything. You could consider growing, like there are people producing ginger in Alberta in greenhouses here, so probably could be the same in Ontario. So that might be one product you could grow more locally. And if you wanted to look at sugar beets, I mean, they're more local as well, usually GMO.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but the problem is that it's all seasonal here. There's two places that grow ginger here in Southern Ontario, but it's all seasonal. So that means I have to produce it all at once.
Yeah.
Okay, as opposed to if I was, say, to have a vertical farm, I could be growing it on a just-in-time basis.
Yeah. Those are things for you to grapple with for sure. And I would just say, like, it is possible to connect with local producers. So just keep doing your Google searches on, maybe look at the OEC world to see who's producing them. I have no idea where most of our ginger comes from, but you could see which countries are
Right.
producing most of the ginger in the world through a tool like that, and then start Googling ginger producers to try and identify producers
Yeah, most of
that
the
you could
cheap,
contact directly.
most of the cheap gingers come from China. I'm getting it from Peru, and it's a far more bold taste. It's a much more intense product. But then the other side of that coin is I want to be able to actually source red Jamaican ginger and black ginger and mango ginger and you know, there's about more than a dozen different types of gingers, and they all have unique flavors.
You might, yeah, I think one thing I've seen, like, I think it's canola seed. I hope it's canola seed. We kind of alternate North America and South America. I forget which, I think it's Peru or Chile. That does a lot of canola seed production for Canada, because it's North Hemisphere versus Southern Hemisphere, right? So that might be something that you look at as part of your sourcing strategy over the long term, is sourcing and producing one kind of ginger beer, where you can source a lot of that product in North America, a little bit more locally, and then look to source things in South America for another part of the year. Are some things that come to mind and strategies that you could deploy. Dan, you've got a question.
Not a question. I should say up front, I have a bias. Alberta's married to our oldest son. So, and I've helped a few days here and there on the farm. This year I was unable to because I had some Baha'i service work doing in central Alberta. But I think way back when Alberta was introduced, people, yes, she's very humble about what she does, because even some of this stuff today is sort of new to me, not totally, but we've never really had in depth of it, because Alberta will say a lot in very few words, and you have to go away and think about it. But anyway, I wanted to thank you, Alberta, for this. And while you were giving this lecture, I was putting my container garden to bed with my low tunnels and my row cover, and I got bags drying of stuff. My rain gutter grow system is now put to sleep, and I'm just finishing off the last of it before we're supposed to get snow again on Tuesday, Wednesday, I guess. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you very much for this, and I'll be twisting some arms for the greater family and friends to listen to this and think about these things. Everything we think about in this world has complexity to it. I like to say it's complex rather than complicated. Complicated sort of means we can't deal with it. Complex means we can. Although some people switch those definitions, but it's the one I use. So I'm just the whole agriculture thing really has excited me over the last 5 years after being in slave labor for 12 years in the Maritimes on a farm and saying I was never going to do any farming again. I started 6-7 years ago now. And so I'm really just excited. And I think there is a whole crop of young people coming behind us. I'm part of several permaculture groups and so on. I even took a permaculture course during the pandemic. And there's a whole group coming behind, and they're starting to do bigger and bigger and bigger acreages. And they've been able to tap, some of them anyway, tap into some big money. We're talking billions, and now doing some really large projects to see what they, and learn. Basically, they're doing the same thing we are doing. I think in the faith as well, is that we're doing things, reflecting on it, taking our learnings away, and then going back to work again. So anyway, thank you, Alberta.
Thanks, Dan. I guess everyone in the comments wants to hear from Gary. Shay, I don't know if he's willing to speak, but
Well,
how are you doing?
I'm ready to speak, but the question is, was I here on time? You know,
It doesn't matter.
The time changes here differently than the time changes there. I think Arthur probably knows that, but apparently he was ready for it. I wasn't. But anyway, I'm not exactly sure what, how to respond at this point in time. Maybe give me an idea, because I mean, I think most of you know that internationally, I've worked all my life in agriculture all over the world, quite the way it is. So it's different in different countries and different places. And so when I hear things, I always have to reflect upon, are we talking about here, or are we talking about there, or are we talking about that? All of these are different to me in different perspectives in different countries that I've been in. And so I think really the main thing for me here in Ukraine is, of course, here, how are
Because his Wi-Fi froze.
I think so.
we going to be able to deal with that? Farmers around me, and where we take year to this year, maybe next year we will. But Spain, France, didn't they have a climate problem this year? A big one. And some of the other countries in Europe, it switches from country to country, from place to place. And we have to be aware of that, because that's what's going to be the future, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's integrated, right? There is an opportunity for local agriculture, and also just recognizing that the sustainability of the world sort of depends on us sharing and trading because of climate change, I would say, and political change as well. So I guess one of the questions really is like, how are things in Ukraine? I am personally curious to know like what production looked like this year.
In different areas of Ukraine, it's perfectly normal, but that doesn't mean Eastern Ukraine or Southern Ukraine. It depends on where in Ukraine we're talking about. Where I am, my farm is 2 hours south of Kyiv, and so it's okay, no problems. We're out working, the tractors are working, we're able to develop and harvest, and a lot of harvest I saw taking place in the last couple of weeks in my region. So, but the thing is again, I do believe that if we look at here, or we look at, let's say to the United States, the corporate activities in the United States seem to be oriented more on the financial, how they can make money in the context of like being able to control from planting all the way through to selling in grocery stores. This kind of corporate activity is creating huge profits. Is that good for us? Personally, I do not think so. I think it's very bad for us. As far as Ukraine and Russia, the supply food that we're producing here, which we're doing quite well, 20 years ago we did not, but it's been developing. But it's very well known that Africa and Middle East particularly are going to be hit hard if they don't let us continue to send grain out of Ukraine, which they are allowing up till now. But yesterday, Mr. Putin says, no, I don't think it should be going anymore. And so what's going to happen? You know, so the food production out of this region and other regions has to be able to be served the other communities in a very honest way, if you will. That's not after corporate, profits, what I think personally are being perverted by legal issues. For example, in the United States Congress and here in Ukraine also. How did it get to this point?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that and the need for not just economic indicators of success for corporations, let's say, or for food production, but also environmental and social considerations to really consider, food production successful, if you will, rather than just extractive, which is, I guess, sort of my view on that corporate piece. And then I just shared like 9%. There's a tool called OEC World, Gary, and I just jumped into it to look at wheat production globally. So of course I'm in Canada, and so we produce a lot of the world's wheat that is exported, and Ukraine and Russia and the US being the other big producers. So 9% in 2020 of the world's wheat was exported from Ukraine, and mostly to Africa, but also Indonesia, Pakistan. So I didn't hear that about Mr. Putin's call yesterday, but I think this war is going to have a really negative impact on the world's food security that we don't even understand. Maybe we see the negative impact, what it might be, but we won't see the impacts for another year. But thanks for sharing your perspective.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, Alberta, I really like the fact that how you described your CSA, your community supported agriculture. It's much more than just agriculture. It's much more. And I think the benefits, so you see the benefits of that in terms of social action too. Whereas, industrialized agriculture is not so much concerned with these things. It's more about the profit kind of thing. So what you're doing is a benefit in many more different ways than just food.
Yeah. I think so. Or like that's,
it's beautiful.
I mean, because we charge a lot more for the food too, there has to be other benefits to what we're charging to our clients, right? Beyond the food itself.
Right, but then they're also contributing to that benefit, and I think that's part of why people engage in that, why they support community supported agriculture, is that there is that benefit to the community. Like you said, you donated food to different organizations and different groups. So people feel like they're supporting that.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to say too, like there's an efficiency that comes with that industrial system though as well that is pretty amazing. I can at most feed 85 families on a seasonal basis. You saw we've got 106 frost-free days. Like that's where I'm going to tap out. Right. Well, that's not like helping global food security. Do you know what I mean? That's not even really helping local food security. but it does a lot of other things. So I think that's where the benefits are. And I guess everybody, somebody wrote to me, maybe it was Douglas, to our farm email address, and I'm like, I see you worked in the oil and gas industry. What do you know about food, as well as like what I am doing now in the food space? And that's true. And I'm not all negative on oil and gas. And I think I just wanted to share like the environmental social governance that the oil and gas industry, the pressures that they have on them to report on more than just their revenues, just the bottom line revenues, is like very different from all other sectors. Like I don't think any other sector has the same pressures as the oil and gas industry, but it's for the better. And so like probably the food industry is going to have to be pressured to report on more than just revenues, like moving forward.
I think you paraphrased me a little off there. I was looking
Sorry.
at who the speaker was, and there was this indication you were working for the government in food security. And then I was looking up this other person, and I was thinking, where's the food insecurity stuff here? All I'm seeing is oil and gas. Is this the same person? That's what I asked. I didn't say, oh, no, I didn't say there was anything wrong with working with that. It's just that
that's okay, Doug. Am I the same person? Yes, I am.
yes.
So I have worked in other sectors of the economy, like from a government economic development lens, besides agriculture. I'm really new to the agriculture industry, actually. In a way, I have a lot to learn. Winnie and then Neil, and then probably we should wrap it up. Hey, Dawn?
Yes, we are getting short on time, but one of when CSAs first came to the United States decades ago, I was so enamored but aware still that I wish we had a model that would work for inner city low-income moms who need to be working all the time. How could they get good food for their families in a model that somehow is like this, but they certainly can't afford, and most CSAs, I think, are still catering to those who can afford a better price. I did know a market gardener here in North Carolina who was able, because he had a good clients in the restaurant industry, to sell at just about the same as other growers. But that's so rare. And so I'm just suggesting that we be on the lookout for, is there some way that these inner city mothers who don't have time to actually even use the community gardens, which way back in the 90s when we had 9/11, there were, I think, 300 community gardens in New York City itself at that time. Just something that's been on my mind for decades.
Thanks, Winnie. Yeah. It's a good contribution, and agrees, something to think about for sure. I do know one farm that also has like a single parent share that they are able to subsidize and give either a substantial discount or for free. And I think that's probably where we can collaborate with corporations as well, who want to, like, I'm not a certified charity or anything, but there's probably room for us to partner with a charity that would, now that I understand my costs of production a little bit better, the food bank might be able to subcontract to me at a reasonable rate to get some of that local produce, so that we're all winning. But that's not really my angle, but there are other businesses that do focus on that. Neil?
Just to respond to the question in Ukraine, it is actually highlighting the system, whether the energy system, because of the embargo on Russian power, And also, so it is a crisis, but the victory is that there is this increasing awareness of the systems that people took for granted during peacetime. So I'll give some examples. Portugal has not been dependent on the Iberian Peninsula has not been dependent on the Russian power. So the European community is kind of looking to see how Portugal is doing it. And another example is that certain media platforms like the New York Times, Guardian, and the BBC are really consistently pursuing the food system kind of beat on a regular basis and are doing a lot of good stuff. For example, the BBC highlighted indoor tree farming in Scotland, where they can grow trees like 5 times quicker in controlled environments by designing a recipe of parameters for each species of tree. I thought this was really quite exciting in terms of multiplication of trees. I just wanted to share those perspectives. And also a term that I'm hearing more about in Canadian academia is food systems literacy. So these were just some of the positive things I wanted to share.
Gary?
I know we're running out of time, but when you talk about Ukraine, it's obviously, it comes to mind. Certainly, what we're seeing taking place now in Ukraine is not, in my personal opinion here in Ukraine, it's not just about Ukraine. It's about a lot more than Ukraine. Most of us know, if we're in climate reality and we're doing different kind of research on different aspects of the world today, we know that we're actually headed in the coming decade 1, 2, 3 for serious existential crises. Not just, and Ukraine is, of course, right in the middle of all of that. And so, you know, I think the other, what also when I think of this, tend to be my phone. Sounds like my phone. It's not my phone. Anyway, before I forget what I was saying about, when we're talking about the corporate activities, somehow or another, I think, you know, we shouldn't be talking so much about all of these things. In my opinion now, we need to switch from talking to doing, to social action. Of course, discourse is what the World Center says we should be involved in with everybody, not just Baha'is, with everybody, but we should also be involved in social action. And I think community development as a priority, more than discussing all of these intellectual things that we need to learn about. Of course, it's not enough, I think, for going forward. We have to start doing something really more and more at a community level. Why are you smiling so much, Neil?
Who, me?
No,
My
Neil
friend.
McMillan is muted though, and he's
Oh.
been chatting away for 30 seconds.
No, it's going from consultation to action. I love it. And after this, I'm going straight back down to the farmer's market to speak to the people, because it's the last, it's closing at 3 o'clock in 20 minutes. So I got to go.
All right. All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming today and being part of this really wonderful conversation. And we'll see you next month. Next month, our plan is to have Masaidio Kalenga from Jinja, Uganda, to speak to us about his activities, which involve agriculture and social action. So that's a good segue here. How we put this all, how we combine the two. We bring agriculture and social action together. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alberta.
Thank you,
Thank
Alberta.
you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you so
Dynamite.
much.
It was really great. Thank you.